Mom, I've planned something special for us. Just you and me in the mountains. Those words should have been a gift, but they became the rope that dragged me into the coldest, most heartbreaking betrayal of my entire life. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. If you also believe that we still have value, even after 60, type 1 in the comments. And please, leave a like and subscribe. Let's show that we're strong together. My name is Eleanor Matthews, and at 68, I thought I understood the weight of sacrifice. I thought I knew what it meant to give everything for family, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what my own daughter would do to me on a frozen mountain ridge in Colorado. It was a Sunday morning in late October when Rachel knocked on my bedroom door, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. The autumn light filtered through my lace curtains, casting gentle shadows across the hardwood floors of what used to be my own home, the same floors I'd polished for 40 years before selling everything to move in with her family 8 years ago. She wore that soft cashmere sweater I'd bought her for Christmas, the one that cost me 3 months of my Social Security payments. But seeing her smile made every penny worth it. "Mom," she said, settling onto the edge of my bed with that voice she used when she wanted something important. "I've been thinking, we never spend time together anymore, just the two of us. Remember when I was little, and we'd drive up to Vail? You'd pack those terrible peanut butter sandwiches, and we'd sit by the lake for hours just talking?" My heart swelled like a balloon in my chest. Those were some of my most treasured memories. Rachel at 7 years old, gap-toothed and giggly, collecting smooth stones while I braided wildflowers into her hair. Back then, I was her whole world, and she was mine. Before life got complicated, before her divorce, before I became the silent ATM living in her guest room. "I remember," I whispered, my voice catching slightly. "You always wanted to skip rocks, but they just sank like little stones." She laughed, genuinely laughed, for the first time in months. "Exactly. Well, I found this amazing cabin rental up at Timber Pass. It's rustic, peaceful, completely off the grid. No phones, no internet, no distractions. Just us, reconnecting like we used to." Her green eyes sparkled with what I thought was excitement, but now recognized as something far more calculated. "Just us?" I asked, hope blooming in my chest like spring after a brutal winter. "Just us, Mom. Mother-daughter time. We'll hike, cook over the fire, maybe even try fishing in that creek you always talked about. When was the last time you did something purely for yourself?" I couldn't remember. The last 8 years had been a blur of doctor appointments I'd driven her to when her car was in the shop, grocery runs where my debit card always seemed to be the one that worked, and quiet evenings spent babysitting my grandson Michael while Rachel went out with friends I was never invited to meet. I'd paid for house repairs, covered Michael's school supplies, and somehow always ended up splitting restaurant bills, even though my fixed income was a fraction of her salary from the marketing firm. "Oh, sweetheart," I breathed, reaching for her hand. Her fingers were warm and soft, hands that had never known the calluses I'd earned from decades of cleaning houses to put food on our table when she was growing up. "That sounds absolutely wonderful." But something flickered across her face, so quickly I almost missed it. A tightness around her eyes, a barely perceptible exhale, like someone who'd just secured a business deal they weren't entirely proud of. At the time, I dismissed it as stress from her demanding job. "Great! I've already booked it for this weekend. Friday to Sunday. Pack light, just the essentials. And Mom?" She squeezed my hand with both of hers, looking directly into my eyes with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. "Thank you for everything you've done for us, for Michael, for me. I know I don't say it enough, but I see you. I see all your sacrifices." Tears sprang to my eyes before I could stop them. When was the last time she'd acknowledged what I'd given up? The cozy 2-bedroom condo I'd loved, with its view of the city park where I used to feed ducks every morning. The financial independence I'd worked 35 years to achieve. The quiet dignity of my own space, my own routines, my own choices about how to spend my twilight years. "You don't need to thank me, darling," I managed, my voice thick with emotion. "Family takes care of family. That's what love is." She smiled then, that brilliant movie star smile that had charmed teachers, boyfriends, and eventually her ex-husband, before he discovered her spending habits and fled. Exactly, Mom. Family takes care of family. The next few days passed in a haze of anticipation. I pressed my warmest clothes, packed my arthritis medication, and even splurged on a new pair of hiking boots from the clearance rack at the outdoor store. Michael helped me choose which books to bring, his 12-year-old hands carefully arranging my reading glasses and bookmark in my overnight bag. "Will you FaceTime me every day, Grandma Elle?" he asked, using the nickname that never failed to make me smile. "I want to see the mountains." "Every single day, sweetheart," I promised, kissing his forehead that still smelled like the strawberry shampoo I bought him. "I'll show you everything. The trees, the creek, maybe even some wildlife." "Mom's been acting weird lately," he said quietly, glancing toward the kitchen where Rachel was loudly reorganizing cabinets. "She's been on the phone a lot, whispering, and she counted the money in her wallet like 5 times yesterday." A small chill ran down my spine, but I pushed it away. "People get stressed sometimes, honey. This trip will be good for both of us." Friday morning arrived crisp and clear, with the kind of October sky that makes Colorado famous. Endless blue stretched tight as a drum over the mountains. I stood in the driveway at 6 a.m. sharp, my small duffel bag at my feet, watching Rachel load what seemed like an enormous amount of gear into her SUV. Designer sleeping bags, a cooler that looked expensive enough to feed a family for a week, and duffel bags I didn't recognize. "Ready, Mom?" she called, sunglasses already perched on her nose despite the early hour. "Ready," I called back, though something in my stomach felt unsettled. Maybe it was just excitement mixed with nerves. After all, I hadn't been away from her home, in over 2 years. As we pulled out of the driveway, I waved goodbye to Michael through his bedroom window. He pressed his small palm against the glass, and I pressed mine back, a ritual we'd developed during the pandemic that had somehow stuck. In my purse, my phone buzzed with a text from him. "Have fun, Grandma Elle. Love you to the moon. Love you to the stars," I typed back, our usual response. The drive into the Rockies should have been magical. The aspen trees were at their peak, brilliant gold coins fluttering against evergreen mountainsides that seemed to stretch forever. But as we climbed higher, winding through increasingly remote territory, Rachel grew quieter. Her earlier chatter about childhood memories and quality time faded into terse responses and the occasional heavy sigh. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" I asked as we passed a sign for Timber Pass. Elevation 9,847 feet. "Fine, Mom. Just concentrating on the road." But her knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and twice I caught her checking her phone at red lights, scrolling through what looked like text messages with urgency that seemed odd for a relaxing weekend getaway. 3 hours later, we pulled into a gravel driveway beside a log cabin that took my breath away, but not in the way I'd hoped. The structure was beautiful, certainly, with its river rock chimney and wide wraparound porch, but something about it felt cold, abandoned. No smoke rose from the chimney despite the October chill. The windows stared down at us like empty eyes. "Here we are," Rachel announced with forced brightness, jumping out of the car with an energy that seemed almost manic. "Our home away from home." I climbed out more slowly, my joints protesting the long drive and the thin mountain air. At nearly 10,000 feet, every breath felt like work. "It's beautiful, honey. But shouldn't there be smoke from the chimney? It's freezing up here." Rachel was already unloading bags with the efficiency of someone executing a plan. "Oh, that? Yeah, there's a tiny issue with the propane tank. But don't worry. We'll get it sorted. This is going to be an adventure, right?" An adventure. As I stood there in the gathering dusk, watching my daughter avoid my eyes while she bustled around with nervous energy, I felt the first whisper of something that would grow into full-blown terror by morning. The cold wasn't just in the air. It was seeping into my bones, into my heart, into the spaces between my ribs where a mother's love had lived, unquestioned and absolute, for 68 years. But I was about to learn that some kinds of cold can freeze you from the inside out. That first night in the cabin, as I lay shivering on a bare mattress thrown carelessly on the floor, my mind drifted back to the moment everything changed. The day Rachel showed up at my door 8 years ago, tears streaming down her face, her marriage crumbling like autumn leaves. "Mom, I have nowhere else to go," she'd whispered, clutching 3-year-old Michael to her chest while her Mercedes sat in my driveway, packed with designer luggage and broken dreams. David cleaned out our accounts. He's filing for divorce and his lawyers are ruthless. I need help. I'd opened my arms without hesitation, the way mothers do. Come here, baby girl. We'll figure this out together. But figuring it out had meant selling the condo I'd scrimp and save to buy after my own divorce 20 years earlier. The little sanctuary with morning sunlight that danced across my kitchen table, where I'd planned to spend my golden years reading novels and tending to my garden of African violets. I'd worked double shifts at the hospital laundry for 15 years to afford that place. My hands cracked and bleeding from industrial detergents, my back aching from lifting endless loads of soiled linens. It's just temporary, Mom, Rachel had promised as we signed the papers to sell. Just until I get back on my feet? 6 months? Maybe a year at most? 8 years. 8 years of living in what she called the guest room, but felt more like exile. A space so small I had to choose between a dresser and a reading chair, where the walls were painted a sterile beige that reminded me daily that this wasn't home. This was charity. Now, lying on this cabin floor with cold seeping through every crack in the logs, I replayed the countless sacrifices that had led me here. The credit card I'd maxed out to pay Rachel's lawyer fees when David's team threatened to take Michael away. The retirement fund I'd liquidated to cover the down payment on her current house. The one with the marble countertops and stainless steel appliances that I cleaned weekly while she worked late or went out with friends. Eleanor, she'd say when I suggested maybe I could contribute less to household expenses. You live here too. We all have to do our part. My part. My Social Security check of $1,847 a month, every penny of which went to groceries, utilities, Michael's school supplies, and the endless repairs on a house that was never quite mine. While Rachel's marketing salary, which she never disclosed, but I estimated at over $80,000, disappeared into clothes, spa treatments, and weekend trips with girlfriends who never seemed to remember my name when they picked her up. The worst part wasn't the money. It was the slow erosion of my voice, my choices, my sense of self. Like the time I'd suggested we spend Christmas at my late sister's cabin in Aspen, a tradition Rachel had loved as a child. Mom, that's so outdated, she'd laughed, not looking up from her phone. Michael needs to be around other kids during the holidays. We're doing Christmas here with the neighbors. You understand, right? I'd spent Christmas morning cooking for 12 people I barely knew, watching through the kitchen window as Rachel opened gifts that cost more than I spent on food in 3 months. Michael had saved his allowance to buy me a small, succulent plant, the only gift I'd received that year. Grandma L, he'd whispered, pressing the tiny pot into my hands. I know you miss having plants. Maybe this one can live in your room? That succulent still sat on my windowsill, somehow thriving despite the north-facing window that barely got sunlight. Like me, it had learned to survive on very little. Then there were the medical appointments. My arthritis had worsened over the years, and my doctor recommended physical therapy twice a week. But somehow, every Tuesday and Thursday, Rachel had urgent errands that required my car. Or rather, the car I'd bought, but she'd gradually claimed as her own. Mom, you know I'd drive you, but this client meeting could change everything for my career. You understand, right? You could take the bus. The bus. At 68, with joints that screamed in protest, taking 3 transfers to reach a medical appointment. While my car, the reliable Honda I'd bought with my pension lump sum, sat in her driveway with Rachel behind the wheel, heading to another lunch that would somehow never translate into the career breakthrough she constantly promised was just around the corner. I'd started keeping a mental tally, though I tried not to. The $400 emergency room bill when Michael fell off his bike. Mom, my card's maxed out. Could you handle this one? The $800 heating bill last winter when she'd insisted on keeping the house at 75 degrees. You're always cold anyway, right? The $200 for new school clothes when Michael started middle school. He can't be the only kid wearing last year's brands. But it wasn't just money. It was time, energy, pieces of my soul I'd never get back. The nights I'd stayed up with Michael when he had nightmares about his father, who'd vanished so completely he might as well have been a ghost. The mornings I'd rushed to make his lunch because Rachel was running late again. The parent-teacher conferences I'd attended alone because Rachel had sudden work emergencies that always seemed to coincide with anything requiring emotional labor. "You're so much better with him anyway, Mom," she'd say, already grabbing her purse and keys. "He listens to you." He listened to me because I was the one who was always there. I was the one who helped with homework, kissed scraped knees, and held him when he cried about missing the father who'd chosen his new girlfriend over his own son. I was the one who showed up day after day, while Rachel collected the credit for being a devoted single mother. Even my friendships had withered. My book club had stopped calling after I'd missed 6 meetings in a row due to various family emergencies. My neighbor Margaret, who'd been my walking partner for years, had gently suggested I seemed overwhelmed and maybe should take some time for myself. But there was no time for myself. There was only Rachel's schedule, Michael's needs, and the endless list of household crises that somehow always required my immediate attention and financial contribution. "Mom, your family," Rachel would say whenever I hesitated to open my wallet yet again. "Family takes care of family, right? Family takes care of family." The phrase that had become both my guiding principle and my prison sentence. Now, as mountain wind howled through gaps in the cabin walls and I pulled a thin blanket tighter around my shoulders, I realized how perfectly this moment encapsulated our relationship. Here I was, 68 years old, sleeping on the floor while my daughter stretched out in comfort in the cabin's only real bedroom. Even in this supposedly romantic mother-daughter getaway, I was still the afterthought, the one expected to make do with whatever scraps were left over. Through the cabin's single window, I could see snow beginning to fall, fat, wet flakes that would make tomorrow's hiking impossible. But from Rachel's room came only the soft sound of peaceful breathing. She was sleeping like a baby, unburdened by guilt or concern for my comfort. I closed my eyes and tried to find sleep, but my mind kept circling back to a conversation I'd overheard 3 weeks ago. Rachel had been on the phone in the kitchen, speaking in the low, urgent tones she used for what she called important business. No, I've got it handled," she'd said. "Trust me. After this weekend, everything changes. She won't be a problem anymore." At the time, I'd assumed she was talking about work, some difficult client or challenging project. But lying here in the dark, with cold seeping into my bones and doubt creeping into my heart, those words took on a different meaning. Everything changes. She won't be a problem anymore. A problem. Was that what I'd become? After 8 years of sacrifice, of pouring my life savings into her stability, of raising her son while she rebuilt her career, was I now just a problem to be solved? The wind picked up, rattling the cabin's windows like skeletal fingers trying to get in. Or maybe, I thought with a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature, like something trying to get out. Something that had been trapped for far too long, fed promises and kept docile with guilt, but was finally beginning to understand the true nature of its cage. In the darkness, I whispered a question I'd never dared ask before. Was I used? The words hung in the frigid air like my visible breath, and for the first time in 8 years, I didn't immediately rush to silence the doubt, to smooth it over with excuses and justifications and the blind faith that had kept me giving, until I had nothing left but hope. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and somewhere in the distance, a sound that might have been the wind, or might have been something far more dangerous, began to howl. I woke to the sound of my own chattering teeth. The cabin was so cold that frost had formed on the inside of the windows, creating delicate patterns that might have been beautiful if I wasn't fighting hypothermia. My joints had locked up during the night, my arthritis screaming in protest against the damp cold that had seeped through the floorboards and into my bones. "Rachel?" I called out, my voice barely a whisper in the frigid air. "Honey, are you awake?" Silence. Then the sound of expensive sheets rustling from the only heated room in the cabin. "What time is it?" Her voice was groggy, irritated, the tone of someone who'd slept deeply and resented being disturbed. "It's past 8, I managed, trying to push myself up from the mattress. Every movement felt like breaking through ice. "I think we need to get the heat working. I can barely feel my fingers." A long pause. Then, "Oh, right. The propane thing. Yeah, we'll figure that out later. I'm exhausted." Later. as if my potential frostbite was an inconvenience to be dealt with after her beauty sleep. I wrapped the thin blanket around my shoulders and shuffled to the kitchen, hoping to find something warm to drink. The bare cupboards stared back at me, not even a packet of instant coffee or a tea bag. "Rachel, there's no food here," I called, opening cabinet after cabinet to find nothing but dust and the occasional dead spider. Came the muffled response. "I thought you were bringing snacks. I thought you were bringing snacks." My hands started shaking, and not from the cold. When had I ever shown up to anything empty-handed? I was the one who arrived early to family gatherings with casseroles and desserts. I was the one who kept the pantry stocked, who never let anyone go hungry. And she thought I would come to a remote mountain cabin without provisions? Unless she'd counted on me bringing food because she'd planned for there to be none. The thought hit me like a slap. I stood there in the empty kitchen, wearing yesterday's clothes because I'd been too cold to change, staring at cupboards that looked like they'd been deliberately emptied. This wasn't an oversight. This was intentional. "I'm going to walk down to the creek to get some water," I announced, my voice stronger now, fueled by an anger I was just beginning to recognize. "Good thinking, Mom. You're so resourceful." Resourceful. The backhanded compliment stung worse than the mountain wind. I'd been resourceful my entire adult life, making meals from food bank donations when Rachel was young, stretching every dollar until it screamed, finding creative solutions to problems that money could have solved if I'd had any. Now, at 68, I was being resourceful again, fetching water from a freezing creek because my daughter couldn't be bothered to ensure basic necessities. The walk to the creek was treacherous. Snow from the night before had created a slick layer over the rocky path, and my new hiking boots, the ones I'd splurged on for this trip, offered little traction on the ice-covered stones. With each careful step, I felt the weight of every sacrifice I'd made, every time I'd put Rachel's needs before my own safety and comfort. The creek water was so cold, it felt like needles against my palms as I filled the metal pot I'd found hanging by the back door. Mountain streams in October. What had I been thinking? But then again, I hadn't been thinking. I'd been feeling grateful that my daughter wanted to spend time with me, feeling hopeful that we might recapture some of the closeness we'd lost over the years, feeling like a fool. By the time I made it back to the cabin, my teeth were chattering so violently I could barely speak. Rachel had emerged from her warm room, wrapped in a designer parka that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check, watching me struggle through the door with the heavy pot. "You're doing great, Mom," she said, her voice carrying that particular brand of condescension I'd become too familiar with. Just roughing it a little. Roughing it. I set the pot down harder than necessary, water sloshing over the sides. "Rachel, this isn't roughing it. This is dangerous. I could have fallen on those rocks. I could have gotten seriously hurt." She shrugged, already scrolling through her phone. "But you didn't. You're tougher than you think. Tougher than you think." Another phrase that sounded like a compliment, but felt like a dismissal. I was tough because I'd had to be. I was tough because no one else was going to take care of me. I was tough because I'd learned, through decades of single motherhood and financial struggle, that complaints were luxuries I couldn't afford. But standing there, dripping creek water on the cabin floor while my daughter ignored my near hypothermia to check her Instagram, I realized that my toughness had become my prison. Because I could survive anything, people expected me to. Because I always found a way to manage. No one worried about whether I should have to. "I'm going to try to get a fire started," I said, more to fill the silence than because I expected help. "Great idea. I'll just supervise." Rachel settled into the cabin's only comfortable chair, the one positioned strategically near the window with the best light for phone photography. The firewood was damp, the kindling sparse, and my arthritic hands struggled with the matches. I'd built countless fires over the years, during camping trips with Rachel when she was small, in the fireplace of the home I'd lost to pay for her legal fees, even in trash cans during the brief period after my divorce when the electricity got shut off. But this felt different. This felt like survival. After an hour of coaxing reluctant flames from wet wood, I finally got a small fire going. The warmth was minimal, barely reaching beyond a 3-foot radius. But it was something. I huddled as close as I dared, trying to thaw my frozen fingers. "Mom," Rachel said suddenly, not looking up from her phone. "I've been thinking about your living situation." My blood turned colder than the creek water. "What about it?" "Well, you've been with us for 8 years now. Michael's getting older, more independent. Maybe it's time you considered other options." Other options. My heart started hammering against my ribs. What kind of other options? There are some really nice senior living communities around Denver. Places where you'd have your own space, activities with people your age, medical care on site. It might be good for you to have more independence. Independence. The word sounded obscene coming from someone who'd spent 8 years systematically stripping away every vestige of my autonomy. "Rachel, those places cost thousands of dollars a month. You know I can't afford—" "Well, that's the thing." She finally looked up from her phone, her green eyes cool and calculating. "You've been helping us financially for so long, and I'm grateful, really. But I think it's created an unhealthy dependency. For both of us. Unhealthy dependency." I stared at her. This woman I'd carried in my body for 9 months, nursed through countless childhood illnesses, supported through her darkest hours. This woman who was now suggesting that my presence in her life, the life I'd funded, stabilized, and sacrificed my own future to maintain, was somehow toxic. "I depend on you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "Not financially, obviously, but emotionally. You've made yourself so essential to our routine that Michael barely knows how to function without you. It's not healthy for a 12-year-old to be so attached to his grandmother." The cruelty of it took my breath away. Michael, who ran to me when he had nightmares. Michael, who saved his allowance to buy me gifts. Michael, who told me every day after school about his classes, his friends, his fears and dreams. Because I was the one who was always there to listen. Now my love for him, and his for me, was being reframed as pathology. "And honestly, Mom," Rachel continued, her voice taking on the practiced tone of someone delivering a rehearsed speech, "I think you've gotten too comfortable. You need to challenge yourself. Build your own life instead of living through ours. Living through theirs." I thought of the garden I'd never planted because we moved too often. The book club I'd left because there was always some family crisis requiring my attention. The friendships I'd abandoned because there was never time for coffee dates or phone calls when every moment was devoted to keeping their household running. I'd given up my life, and now I was being accused of not having one. "Where would I go?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. Rachel's smile was bright and empty, like a magazine advertisement. "That's what this weekend is for. To give you space to think, to plan, to figure out what comes next. No distractions, no pressure. Just you, alone with your thoughts. Alone with my thoughts. In a freezing cabin with no food, no heat, and no way to contact the outside world. This wasn't a mother-daughter bonding weekend. This was an intervention, a carefully orchestrated campaign to convince me that my presence in their lives was a burden they could no longer bear. But even as the realization crashed over me like an avalanche, part of me, the part that had been trained through decades of putting everyone else first, scrambled to make excuses for her. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had become too comfortable. Maybe Michael would be better off learning independence. Maybe. "I brought some brochures," Rachel said, pulling a manila folder from her designer bag. "Just to look at. Some really beautiful places." She spread them across the small table like a real estate agent closing a deal. Sunrise Manor, Golden Years Community, Autumn Acres Assisted Living. Each brochure featured the same stock photos, silver-haired models playing chess, doing watercolor painting, smiling over meals they'd never have to cook themselves. "Look at this one," Rachel said, pointing to a particularly glossy pamphlet. "They have a pool, a library, even a beauty salon. And it's only $2,300 a month. Very reasonable. $2,300. More than my entire monthly income." I stared at the brochures, understanding with crystal clarity that this weekend wasn't about reconnecting. It was about disconnecting. Permanently. "How would I pay for it?" I asked. Rachel's pause was barely perceptible, but I caught it. "Well, you've got some savings left, right? And maybe we could work something out with the house. I mean, you did help with the down payment. The house. The house I'd made possible with my life savings. The house where I'd lived as a guest for 8 years, contributing to every payment, every repair, every improvement. The house that was entirely in Rachel's name because I'd trusted her to protect my investment. The house I apparently no longer had any claim to. Outside, the wind was picking up again, rattling the windows and sending snow spiraling past the glass. Inside, my daughter was dismantling my life with the same casual efficiency she brought to reorganizing kitchen cabinets. And I was sitting by a dying fire, holding brochures for my own exile, finally understanding that this weekend in the mountains wasn't the beginning of our renewed relationship. It was the end of everything I'd thought we were. The second night brought a blizzard that transformed the world outside into a white abyss. Snow piled against the windows like nature's own prison bars, and the wind howled with a fury that seemed to echo the growing storm in my chest. The small fire I'd managed to coax to life earlier had died hours ago, leaving the cabin colder than a morgue. I huddled on my floor mattress, wrapped in every piece of clothing I'd brought, listening to the comfortable sounds of Rachel settling into her warm bed in the only heated room. The contrast was so stark it felt intentional, like a carefully orchestrated reminder of our respective places in this twisted hierarchy she'd constructed. "Mom!" she called out around 10 o'clock, her voice carrying that false sweetness I'd learned to dread. "Are you comfortable out there?" Comfortable. I almost laughed, but the sound would have come out as a sob. My lips were turning blue. I could see my breath in the moonlight streaming through the frost-covered windows. My arthritis had progressed from painful to excruciating, each joint feeling like it was being twisted with pliers. "I'm fine," I managed, because that's what I always said. "I'm fine. I can handle it. I don't need anything." The lies I'd been telling for so long they'd become automatic. "Good. Sleep well." The casual dismissal hit me like a physical blow. Here I was, 68 years old, potentially developing hypothermia, and my daughter was treating my suffering like a minor inconvenience. When she was a child and complained of being cold, I'd moved heaven and earth to warm her. Extra blankets, hot chocolate, cuddling until she felt safe. Now the roles were reversed, and her response was to close her door tighter. Somewhere around midnight, my phone buzzed. A text from Michael. "Can't sleep. Missing you, Grandma L. When are you coming home?" My fingers were so numb I could barely type back. "Missing you too, sweetheart. Soon." But as I hit send, a terrible thought crept in. What if soon was a lie? What if this weekend was designed to ensure I never came home at all? What if those assisted living brochures weren't suggestions but ultimatums? The wind grew stronger, rattling the cabin walls like something trying to tear them apart. Through the storm, I heard a new sound. Rachel's voice, muffled but distinct, talking on her phone despite claiming there was no cell service up here. I crept closer to her door, my bare feet silent on the freezing floor. No, it's going perfectly," she was saying, her tone excited, almost gleeful. "She's already looking at the brochures. By tomorrow, she'll be begging to get out of here." My blood turned to ice water. "Trust me, Marcus," she continued, and I recognized the name, her ex-boyfriend who worked in real estate. "After 48 hours of this, she'll sign anything. The house transfer, the power of attorney, whatever we need. House transfer. Power of attorney." The words slammed into me like physical blows. I know it seems harsh, but she's been bleeding us dry for years. Do you know how much money we could free up if we didn't have to support her? Michael's private school alone costs more than she brings in. Support her. As if every dollar I'd contributed, every bill I'd paid, every sacrifice I'd made had been their charitable gift to me rather than my desperate attempts to buy love and belonging. The beauty is, she'll think it was her idea. "Oh, Rachel, you're right. I do need more independence. I should move to a nice facility where I won't be such a burden." Classic manipulation. Make the victim suggest their own punishment. Victim. Punishment. My daughter was describing me in the language of warfare, as if I were an enemy to be defeated rather than the woman who'd given her life meaning. And the best part? Once she's out of the house, we can claim she was never a co-owner. I mean, who's going to believe a senile old woman with dementia? Dementia. My hands started shaking, not from cold this time, but from pure rage. I was many things, but senile wasn't one of them. My mind was sharp, my memory intact. But I understood now why Rachel had been asking me lately if I'd been forgetting things. Why she'd started speaking to me in the slow, patronizing tone people used with children. She'd been laying groundwork, building a case for my incompetence. The lawyer says as long as we have documentation of her mental decline, the house transfer will be clean. No inheritance issues, no legal challenges. She'll be safely tucked away where she can't cause problems. Safely tucked away, like a dangerous animal, like garbage to be disposed of. Marcus, honey, I've been planning this for months. Why do you think I've been so patient with her constant neediness? Every time she paid for something, every time she helped with bills, I documented it as evidence of her inability to manage her own finances. The cruelty was breathtaking. Every act of generosity I'd performed, every sacrifice I'd made, had been weaponized against me. My love had been transformed into evidence of my incompetence. The cabin was genius, right? No witnesses, no interference. Just 48 hours of me showing her how much better off she'd be in a community setting. And if she doesn't come around naturally, well, a couple days of being cold and hungry tends to make people more reasonable. Cold and hungry. This was intentional. The missing food, the broken heater, the isolation, all of it had been carefully orchestrated to break me down. To make me so miserable, I'd agree to anything just to escape. I should go, Rachel whispered. She might hear me. But Marcus? Start looking at those luxury condos we talked about. Once Grandma's estate is liquidated, we'll have enough for that downtown place with the city views. Grandma's estate. They were already spending my money, dividing up assets I wasn't even dead yet to give up. I crept back to my mattress on legs that felt like water. My entire body was shaking now. From cold, from shock, from the devastating realization that the past 8 years hadn't been family taking care of family. They'd been a long con, a systematic campaign to isolate me, drain my resources, and position me for this final betrayal. Every kindness I'd interpreted as love had been calculation. Every moment I'd felt grateful for their tolerance of my presence had been orchestrated manipulation. Even Michael, sweet, innocent Michael, had he been coached to show me affection to keep me compliant? No. That thought was too devastating to entertain. Whatever Rachel had become, Michael's love was real. I had to believe that, or I'd lose what little sanity I had left. But everything else, the grateful smiles when I paid bills, the inclusion in family activities, the patient explanations of why I needed to contribute more each month, all of it had been theater. A performance designed to keep me giving until I had nothing left to give. The blizzard raged harder, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the frosted windows, I heard what sounded like a tree falling. A massive crash followed by silence. The storm was destroying everything in its path, reshaping the landscape with violent indifference. Just like my daughter was reshaping my life. I lay there until dawn, sleepless and frozen, watching the snow pile higher against the windows. Each flake was like another lie settling over the truth, burying it deeper until it became invisible. But I'd heard enough. I knew enough. The question now wasn't whether Rachel was betraying me. It was whether I was strong enough to save myself. When morning light finally struggled through the storm clouds, I heard Rachel stirring in her warm room. Soon she'd emerge with that false, bright smile, ready to continue her psychological warfare disguised as concern. But something had changed in me during that endless, brutal night. The part of me that automatically made excuses for her cruelty, that transformed every red flag into a misunderstanding, that chose hope over evidence. That part had finally frozen to death. I was still cold, still hungry, still trapped in this mountain prison she'd constructed, but I was no longer blind. And for the first time in 8 years, that felt like the beginning of something that might, eventually, feel like power. The storm outside was still raging, but the one inside me was just getting started. The third morning dawned clear and brutally cold. I'd survived another night, though barely. My lips had turned an alarming shade of blue, and when I tried to stand, my legs buckled beneath me. The hypothermia was no longer a threat. It was a reality, creeping through my system like slow poison. Rachel emerged from her heated sanctuary around 9, stretching luxuriously and checking her phone with the casual air of someone who'd slept peacefully while her mother slowly froze to death 15 feet away. "Morning, Mom. How are we feeling today?" We, as if she'd shared any part of my suffering. "I need medical attention," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I think I have hypothermia. My extremities are numb and I can't stop shivering." She looked at me with the clinical assessment of someone evaluating damaged goods. "Oh, you're fine. You're just not used to mountain air. It takes some adjustment." "Rachel, I'm serious. I need to get to a hospital." "Mom," she said, her voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd come to dread. "You're being dramatic. This is exactly what I mean about the dependency issues we discussed. You create medical emergencies when you want attention. Medical emergencies for attention." I stared at her. This woman who'd inherited my nose and my stubborn chin, but none of my capacity for love. She was watching me deteriorate with the detached interest of a scientist observing a lab rat. "Besides," she continued, settling into her chair with a steaming mug of coffee, apparently she'd found provisions I wasn't allowed to access. "The roads are completely snowed in. Even if there was an emergency, which there isn't, we couldn't get out until the plows come through." Snowed in. The words should have terrified me, but instead they clarified something important. If we truly couldn't leave, then this weekend wasn't ending tomorrow as planned. She intended to keep me here until I was broken enough to sign whatever documents she'd prepared. I closed my eyes and tried to think past the fog of cold and hunger. There had to be something I could do. Some way to reach the outside world. My phone had been dead since yesterday, but maybe. "I'm going to rest," I announced, shuffling back toward my makeshift bed. "Good idea. You look terrible." The casual cruelty of that comment, delivered while I was fighting for my life, was almost more devastating than everything else combined. This was my daughter, the baby I'd rocked through colic, the toddler I'd sung to sleep every night for 3 years, the teenager I'd defended against teachers and boyfriends and her own worst impulses. Now she was watching me die with the same indifference she'd show a houseplant that had outlived its usefulness. I lay down and pretended to sleep while my mind raced. My phone was dead, but phones could be charged. Car chargers existed, and if Rachel had been making calls last night, her phone was obviously working. Around noon, she announced she was going outside to check the generator, a convenient excuse to make more private phone calls. The moment I heard the door close, I forced myself upright and searched for her charging cable. My hands were so numb I could barely grasp objects, but desperation gave me focus. Her purse, designer leather, probably worth more than I spent on groceries in 6 months. Inside, beneath credit cards and expensive cosmetics, I found what I needed, a charging cable compatible with my phone. My fingers fumbled with the connection, precious seconds ticking by while I tried to make the simple mechanical action work. Finally, the screen flickered to life. 1 bar of signal. Enough. But who could I call? Not 911. Rachel would spin any rescue as evidence of my mental instability. Poor Mom, hallucinating emergencies again. Not my few remaining friends. They lived too far away and would take too long to mobilize help. Michael, my grandson, who'd been texting me worried messages. Michael, who was 12 years old, but had his father's old smartphone for emergencies. Michael, who was the only person in that house who truly loved me. My shaking fingers found his contact. The phone rang once, twice. "Grandma L?" His voice was high with worry. "Where are you? Mom said you were having a great time, but you haven't called like you promised." "Michael," I whispered, glancing toward the door. "I need your help. Something's wrong." "What do you mean wrong? Are you sick?" I'm trapped, sweetheart. Your mom brought me to a cabin, but there's no heat, no food. I'm very cold, and I think I'm in danger. But Mom said..." "Michael, listen to me very carefully. Your mother lied. She's planning to put me in a nursing home and take the house. I heard her talking on the phone about it." Silence. Then, in a small voice, "She's been asking weird questions about you. Like if I think you forget things a lot, or if you seem confused." My heart broke. She'd been grooming my own grandson to testify against me. "Michael, I need you to do something very important. Can you find your mom's computer?" "Yeah, it's in her office. I need you to look up this cabin. It's called Timber Pass Retreat. Can you find the address and GPS coordinates? I heard him moving around, the sound of a keyboard clicking. Okay, I found it. It's super far away, Grandma. Like way up in the mountains. Good boy. Now, I need you to send that information to someone who can help. Do you remember my friend Claire from the hospital? The nurse who sent you the Christmas card? Yes. I'm going to give you her number, and I need you to tell her I'm in danger. Can you do that? But what about Mom? She'll be really mad if she finds out. Michael, I said, my voice gaining strength despite my physical weakness. Your mom is doing something very wrong. She's trying to hurt me, and I need you to be brave enough to help. Like, really hurt you? Yes, sweetheart, really hurt me. Another silence. Then, okay. What's the nurse's number? I gave him Claire's contact information, praying she still worked at Denver General, praying she'd remember me, praying she'd understand the urgency. Tell her I'm at Timber Pass Retreat, Cabin 7. Tell her I have hypothermia and my daughter won't let me leave. Tell her this is financial elder abuse and I need help immediately. Financial elder abuse, he repeated carefully. I'll remember. And Michael? If anything happens to me, if I don't come home, you need to know that I love you more than anything in the world. You're the best thing that ever happened to our family. Don't talk like that, Grandma L. You're going to be fine. I'm going to fix this. The determination in his voice, so young but so fierce, reminded me why I'd fought so hard to stay in his life. He was worth every sacrifice I'd made. He was the one pure thing in this mess. I have to hang up now, I whispered, hearing footsteps outside. Remember? Call Claire, give her all the information, and don't tell your mom we talked. I love you, Grandma L. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know. I disconnected just as the door opened. Rachel stamped snow off her boots, her cheeks rosy from the cold air that would have been refreshing to someone properly dressed and well-fed. How's my patient? She asked with mock concern. Still being dramatic? Just resting, I managed, sliding my phone back under the blanket. Good. I brought some exciting news. I managed to get cell service by the generator, and I called that lovely Sunset Manor place from the brochures. They have a room available. Isn't that wonderful? Sunset Manor, one of the assisted living facilities from yesterday's propaganda session. They're very understanding about emergency placements, she continued, her eyes bright with false enthusiasm. People with sudden cognitive decline often need immediate care. They even have a social worker who specializes in difficult transitions. Difficult transitions. Cognitive decline. She was already building the narrative that would justify my imprisonment. I thought we could drive down there tomorrow, just to look around. What do you think? What I thought was that my 12-year-old grandson was currently my only hope of survival. What I thought was that this woman, who'd once been the center of my universe, had become my executioner. But what I said was, that sounds nice, dear, because I needed her to believe I was still the compliant victim she'd spent 8 years creating. I needed her to think her plan was working. Outside, the snow was beginning to melt in the afternoon sun. Soon the roads would be passable. Soon she'd try to drive me to my cage, armed with forged documents and lies about my mental state. But somewhere in Denver, a 12-year-old boy was making phone calls that might save my life. And for the first time in 3 days, that felt like hope. The question was whether help would arrive before my body gave out completely, or before Rachel realized her prey had found a way to fight back. I pulled the thin blanket closer and watched my daughter through half-closed eyes. This stranger who wore my child's face, but harbored a heart I didn't recognize. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation. But tonight, I had an ally I'd never expected, and a reason to survive that was stronger than all her manipulation combined. Michael loved me, and sometimes, when everything else falls apart, love is the only weapon that matters. I woke to the sound of helicopter blades cutting through the mountain air. At first, I thought it was another hypothermic hallucination, my mind creating rescue fantasies to cope with approaching death. But the sound grew louder, more distinct, and through the frosted windows I could see the dark shape of an aircraft circling the cabin. Rachel bolted upright in the next room. What the hell is that? My heart hammered against my ribs. Could it be? Had Michael actually managed to get help? The helicopter was landing now, in the small clearing behind the cabin. its rotors whipping snow into a blinding whirlwind. "Mom!" Rachel's voice was sharp with panic as she rushed from her room, still in her designer pajamas. "Did you call someone? How could you call someone?" I tried to sit up, every movement agony, but managed to prop myself against the wall. "I don't know what you're talking about." Through the window, I could see figures emerging from the helicopter. At least 3 people in heavy winter gear. One of them was carrying what looked like medical equipment. "This is impossible," Rachel muttered, pacing frantically. "The phones don't work up here. I made sure of that." Made sure of that. Another admission of her deliberate sabotage. Heavy footsteps on the porch, loud knocking. "Mountain Rescue, we're responding to a welfare check." Rachel's face went white. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in like claws. "You listen to me. If you say anything about our private family business, you'll regret it. I'll make sure you end up in the worst facility I can find, somewhere they don't even change the bed sheets." But her threats felt empty now, because that helicopter meant Michael had succeeded. That 12-year-old boy had moved heaven and earth to save me. The door burst open without waiting for permission. 3 people in rescue gear filled the cabin. A paramedic carrying a medical kit, a mountain rescue specialist, and bringing up the rear. A familiar face that made me want to weep with relief. Claire, the nurse from the hospital, still gray-haired and kind-eyed, but now wearing the expression of someone who'd seen exactly what she'd expected to find. Mrs. Matthews, the paramedic, a young woman with decisive movements, was already kneeling beside me. "I'm Sarah Chen with Alpine Rescue. We got a call about a medical emergency." "There's no emergency," Rachel jumped in, her voice taking on that syrupy, sweet tone she used with authority figures. "My mother's just a little cold. We're having a lovely mother-daughter weekend." Someone obviously misunderstood. "Ma'am, please step back," the paramedic said firmly, not even looking at Rachel. Her hands were already on my wrist, checking my pulse. "Mrs. Matthews, can you tell me how you're feeling?" "Cold," I whispered. "So cold. And I haven't eaten in 2 days." Claire moved closer, her face grim. "Eleanor, it's me. Michael called me. That brave boy told me everything." "Michael?" Rachel's voice cracked. "What does Michael have to do with this?" "Your son called the hospital at 2 p.m. yesterday," Claire said, finally turning to face Rachel with undisguised disgust. "He was terrified for his grandmother's life. He gave us GPS coordinates, described the conditions here, and specifically mentioned that he'd overheard you planning financial elder abuse." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Rachel's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "Body temperature is dangerously low," the paramedic announced, wrapping me in thermal blankets that felt like being embraced by angels. "Severe dehydration, signs of malnutrition. How long has she been in these conditions?" 3 days, I managed. 3 days without heat or food? The mountain rescue specialist, a bearded man who looked like he'd seen every form of human cruelty the wilderness could reveal, stared at Rachel with naked contempt. "In October? At this elevation? She's exaggerating," Rachel said desperately. "She gets confused sometimes. Early dementia, you know. She forgets to eat, forgets she's cold. I've been taking care of her." "Is that true, Mrs. Matthews?" Claire asked gently. "Do you forget things? Are you confused about what's been happening here?" I looked directly into her eyes, summoning every ounce of strength I had left. "I am not confused. My daughter brought me here under false pretenses. She removed all the food, disabled the heating, and planned to keep me here until I agreed to sign documents giving her my house. Last night, I heard her on the phone with someone named Marcus, discussing how to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could liquidate my estate." The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel's face cycled through several emotions: panic, rage, calculation, before settling on wounded indignation. "You see?" she said, her voice breaking with practiced sorrow. "This is exactly what I mean. Mom's been having these paranoid episodes for months. She thinks everyone's stealing from her, plotting against her. It's heartbreaking." But Claire was studying me with the sharp eyes of someone who'd spent decades distinguishing between genuine confusion and deliberate manipulation. "Mrs. Matthews, can you tell me what day it is?" "Sunday, October 22nd. We arrived Friday afternoon. You work at Denver General Hospital Cardiac Wing. Your name is Claire. And you once told me you'd been homeless yourself before becoming a nurse. Claire nodded slowly. And can you tell me about your living situation? I sold my condo 8 years ago to help Rachel through her divorce. I moved in with her family and have been contributing financially to household expenses, approximately $1,500 per month from my Social Security. The house is entirely in her name, though I provided the down payment from my retirement savings. Mom, please, Rachel started. I'm not finished, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. 3 weeks ago, I overheard Rachel telling someone on the phone that, after this weekend, everything changes, and that I wouldn't be a problem anymore. This trip was designed to pressure me into assisted living so she could claim my remaining assets. The paramedic and rescue specialist exchanged looks that spoke volumes about what they thought of Rachel's caregiving. Where are these documents you mentioned? Claire asked. Rachel's eyes darted toward her designer bag. There are no documents. She's imagining things. But the rescue specialist was already moving toward the bag. Ma'am, this is a welfare check in response to reports of elder abuse. We're going to need to examine any paperwork related to Mrs. Matthews's care. You can't just search my things. Actually, we can, Claire said calmly. Colorado has mandatory reporting laws for elder abuse. If we have reasonable suspicion, which we do, we're authorized to investigate. The man opened Rachel's bag and pulled out a manila folder. Inside were documents I'd never seen before. Power of attorney forms, property transfer agreements, and most chillingly, a medical declaration, stating that I'd been diagnosed with moderate dementia and was no longer competent to manage my affairs. When was this medical evaluation performed? Claire asked, studying the papers. She saw Dr. Peterson last month, Rachel stammered. I've never seen Dr. Peterson in my life, I said. I see Dr. Williams at the clinic on Federal Boulevard for my arthritis. I've never been diagnosed with dementia by anyone. Claire was photographing the documents with her phone. These forms are all dated for tomorrow, Monday the 23rd. You were planning to have her sign these after the weekend? The evidence was overwhelming. Rachel stood in the middle of the cabin like a defendant watching her alibis crumble one by one. It's not what it looks like, she said finally, her voice small and desperate. Mom, tell them how much I've done for you. Tell them about all the help I've given you. I looked at my daughter, this woman who'd systematically destroyed my life while convincing me to be grateful for the destruction, and felt something I'd never experienced before. Not anger, not even sadness, but a cold, clear certainty about what needed to happen next. The help you gave me, I said slowly, was allowing me to pay your bills, raise your son, and fund your lifestyle until you were ready to dispose of me. That's not help, Rachel. That's exploitation. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. Mrs. Matthews, the paramedic said, we need to get you to a hospital immediately. Your condition is serious. And after that, Claire added, there are going to be some legal conversations about what happened here. As they lifted me onto a stretcher, I caught sight of Rachel's face. No longer the confident manipulator, but a woman watching her carefully constructed scheme collapse in real time. For just a moment, I saw fear there, and something that might have been recognition of the magnitude of what she'd attempted. Mom, she called out as they carried me toward the helicopter. Mom, you don't understand. I was trying to help. I was trying to take care of you. I turned my head to look at her one last time. No, Rachel, you were trying to take care of yourself. There's a difference. The helicopter lifted off, carrying me away from the mountain that had nearly become my grave, away from the daughter who'd tried to bury me there, and toward a future that was terrifying in its uncertainty, but brilliant in its freedom. Below us, the cabin grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely among the endless peaks. But somewhere in Denver, a 12-year-old boy was probably checking his phone, waiting to hear that his grandmother was safe, and that thought, that Michael's love had literally moved mountains to save me, filled me with a warmth that no blanket could ever provide. 3 weeks later, I stood in the lobby of the Grandview Hotel in downtown Denver, wearing a burgundy wool dress I'd bought with my own money, for my own pleasure, without asking anyone's permission. The fabric felt luxurious against my skin, a small rebellion against 8 years of wearing whatever Rachel deemed age-appropriate for someone in my position. My position. That phrase no longer carried the weight of obligation and servitude it once had. I was no longer the grateful dependent living on charity. I was Eleanor Matthews, 68 years old, survivor of financial elder abuse, and for the first time in decades, entirely in charge of my own life. The hotel suite I'd been living in since leaving the hospital wasn't extravagant, but it was mine. Every morning, I woke up in a bed I'd chosen, in a room where every decision, from the temperature to the television channel, was mine to make. The simple luxury of autonomy was more intoxicating than champagne. "Mrs. Matthews?" The voice belonged to David Chen, the attorney who'd taken my case pro bono after Claire connected us. He was young, idealistic, and absolutely furious about what Rachel had attempted. "Are you ready for this?" This was the court hearing where Rachel would face the consequences of her actions. Adult Protective Services had moved swiftly once the evidence emerged. The forged medical documents, the recorded phone conversations Michael had helped me recover from Rachel's cloud storage, the financial records showing years of systematic exploitation. "I'm ready," I said, and meant it. The courthouse was intimidating, all marble and authority, but I walked through its doors with my head high. In the weeks since my rescue, I'd discovered reserves of strength I'd forgotten I possessed. Physical therapy had helped my body recover from the hypothermia, but the emotional healing had been even more profound. I'd spent years believing that love meant sacrifice, that my worth was measured by what I could provide to others. Now I understood that true love, the kind Michael showed me, the kind Claire offered through friendship, didn't require me to diminish myself to prove it. Rachel sat at the defendant's table with her lawyer, an expensive-looking man who probably cost more per hour than I used to spend on groceries in a month. She'd lost weight, and her usually perfect hair looked limp and neglected. When our eyes met across the courtroom, I felt no anger, no satisfaction in her obvious distress, just a profound sadness for the woman she'd chosen to become. The proceedings were swift and decisive. The judge, a stern woman in her 50s who'd clearly seen too many cases of family members preying on vulnerable elderly relatives, listened to the evidence with visible disgust. "The defendant," she announced, "engaged in systematic financial exploitation of her mother over a period of 8 years, culminating in an attempt to fraudulently obtain power of attorney through coercion and forged medical documents. This represents one of the most calculated cases of elder abuse this court has seen." Rachel's lawyer tried to argue that it was a misunderstanding, that his client had been overwhelmed by caregiving responsibilities and made poor decisions under stress, but the evidence was overwhelming. The paper trail, the recorded conversations, even Michael's testimony about the lies Rachel had told him about my mental state. "The court orders full restitution of all funds improperly taken from the victim," the judge continued, "including the proceeds from the sale of Mrs. Matthews' condominium, all household contributions made under false pretenses, and punitive damages for emotional distress. Additionally, the defendant is sentenced to 2 years in prison, suspended pending completion of community service and ongoing supervision. 2 years suspended. It meant Rachel would avoid prison if she stayed out of trouble and completed 500 hours of community service at a nonprofit serving elderly abuse victims. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the courtroom, but the real victory wasn't the legal judgment. It was what happened next. The court also ordered the immediate transfer of the house back to my name, recognizing that my down payment and 8 years of contributions had given me rightful ownership. Rachel would have 30 days to find alternative housing. After the hearing, I found myself standing on the courthouse steps, breathing freely for the first time in years. The October air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of changing seasons and new possibilities. "Grandma Elle?" I turned to see Michael approaching with Claire, who'd been granted temporary guardianship while Rachel's case was pending. He'd grown taller in just 3 weeks, and something in his bearing suggested the ordeal had aged him in ways that had nothing to do with height. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, opening my arms. He ran to me with the enthusiasm of a child, but the relief of someone much older. "I was so scared I'd gotten you in trouble," he whispered against my shoulder. "Mom kept saying you were lying about everything. You saved my life, Michael. Don't ever doubt that." Claire squeezed my hand. "What happens now?" What happened now was something I'd been planning during the quiet evenings in my hotel suite, when the weight of possibility felt almost as overwhelming as my previous captivity had been. "I'm buying a house," I announced. "A small one just for me, with a garden where I can grow vegetables and flowers, and a reading nook by a big window." Michael's eyes lit up. "Can I visit? Can I help with the garden?" "You can visit whenever you want, as long as it's okay with your guardian." I looked at Claire, who nodded encouragingly. "In fact, I was hoping you might want to spend weekends with me sometimes, if you'd like that." "Really? Just us?" "Just us. We'll cook together, read books, maybe take some of those hiking trips I always promised but never had time for." It was a promise I could make now, because my time was my own. No more bills to pay for someone else's lifestyle. No more emergencies that mysteriously required my immediate financial intervention. No more walking on eggshells in a house where I was tolerated but never truly welcomed. That evening, I signed the papers to purchase a small cottage in a neighborhood where children played in tree-lined streets and neighbors knew each other's names. It had 3 bedrooms, one for me, one for Michael when he visited, and one that I planned to turn into an art studio. Art, another dream I'd abandoned years ago when survival took precedence over joy. But at 68, I was rediscovering that joy wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity. The cottage came with a modest garden that the previous owner had neglected. Standing among the overgrown roses and tangled herb bushes, I saw not chaos, but potential. With care and patience, this space could bloom again, like me. I spent my first night in the new house sitting on the front porch, wrapped in a quilt I'd bought simply because I loved its colors. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the distant sound of someone playing piano, something classical and hopeful that drifted through open windows along with the scent of someone else's dinner. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Mom's really sad tonight. She keeps asking if you'll forgive her." I stared at the message for a long time. Forgiveness was complicated. Rachel was still my daughter, still the baby I'd nursed through fevers and celebrated through milestones. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. And it certainly didn't mean returning to the dynamic that had nearly cost me my life. I typed back, "Forgiveness takes time. Love never stops. But trust has to be rebuilt. Focus on taking care of yourself." Another text came immediately. "I love you, Grandma L. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for not giving up." As if I'd had a choice in the matter. But maybe that was the point. I had made choices, even when they didn't feel like choices. I'd chosen to survive each frozen night in that cabin. I'd chosen to trust Michael with my desperate phone call. I'd chosen to tell the truth when rescue came, even though it meant destroying my relationship with my daughter. Now I was choosing to build something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed, in my own house, to sunlight streaming through windows I could open or close as I pleased. I made coffee in a kitchen that smelled like vanilla candles instead of resentment. I sat at a table where no one would count the cost of my breakfast or remind me how much I owed for the privilege of existing. At 9 o'clock, I called the community college to inquire about their pottery classes. At 10, I made an appointment to volunteer at the literacy center where adults learn to read. At 11, I ordered seeds for next spring's garden. Tomatoes and basil and sunflowers that would bloom just because I wanted them to. Each phone call was an act of rebellion against the person Rachel had tried to convince me I was. Helpless, burdensome, diminished by age and circumstance. Each decision was proof that at 68, I wasn't winding down my life. I was finally beginning to live it. That afternoon, Michael called. "Grandma L? Would you really want me to visit this weekend?" "More than anything," I said, and meant it. "We'll make pancakes for breakfast and plant bulbs for spring flowers. How does that sound?" Like the best weekend ever. After we hung up, I sat in my sunny kitchen and marveled at the simple miracle of making plans based on joy rather than obligation. For the first time in 8 years, I wasn't calculating the cost of my choices or worrying about someone else's approval. I was free. And freedom, I was discovering, was the most beautiful thing I'd ever worn. 6 months later, I stood in my garden on a warm April morning, my hands deep in rich soil as I transplanted seedlings that would become this summer's tomatoes. The earth felt alive beneath my fingers, warm, fragrant, full of promise. My roses, which had seemed hopelessly tangled when I first moved in, were now budding with the kind of careful attention they'd been missing for years. Michael knelt beside me, his 13-year-old hands surprisingly gentle as he helped space the plants. He spent every other weekend with me now, and these Saturday mornings in the garden had become our sacred ritual. No phones, no distractions, just the quiet companionship of two people nurturing something beautiful together. "Do you think Mom will ever come visit?" he asked quietly, not looking up from the seedling he was carefully positioning. The question no longer sent a spike of anxiety through my chest, the way it had in those first raw months after the trial. Rachel had completed her community service and was slowly rebuilding her life in a small apartment across town. We exchanged brief, polite texts about Michael's school events and medical appointments, but the relationship we'd once had, complicated and toxic as it had been, was gone forever. "I don't know, sweetheart," I said honestly. "Maybe someday, but that's not up to us to decide." He nodded, accepting this with the wisdom that children develop when they've seen adult relationships fracture and learned that love doesn't always mean proximity. "I'm glad you're happy now," he said, glancing up at the cottage that had become our haven. "You smile all the time now. Real smiles. Not the kind you used to do when you thought nobody was looking." Out of the mouths of babes. This boy had been watching, even at 4 and 5 years old, learning to distinguish between genuine joy and the performative contentment I'd worn like armor for so many years. My pottery class had a spring showcase that afternoon, and 3 of my pieces would be displayed alongside work from students half my age. The asymmetrical bowls and imperfect vases I'd created bore no resemblance to the flawless perfection I'd once thought was required of everything I touched. They were wonky, human, beautiful in their honest imperfection, much like the life I was building. "Mrs. Matthews?" The voice belonged to Sarah, a young woman from my literacy volunteer program who'd been struggling to read to her own children. We'd worked together for months, and watching her confidence grow had been one of the unexpected gifts of my new independence. "I wanted to thank you again for helping me with that job application." She'd gotten the position, receptionist at a pediatric clinic, and would start next week. Her gratitude embarrassed me sometimes, because what I gave her felt so small compared to what I received in return. Purpose. The knowledge that my experience and patience had value beyond what I could contribute to someone else's household budget. That evening, as Michael and I prepared dinner together, real cooking, the kind that involves chopping vegetables and tasting seasonings and making decisions based purely on what sounded delicious, I reflected on how completely my life had transformed. The cottage was small but perfectly suited to my needs. Every piece of furniture had been chosen by me, for me. The books on my shelves were ones I actually wanted to read. The art on my walls reflected my taste, not someone else's idea of what was appropriate for a woman my age. Even the coffee in my kitchen was exactly the blend I preferred, strong and bitter, without anyone suggesting I might want something milder. Independence, I'd discovered, wasn't just about finances or housing. It was about reclaiming the right to make choices, small ones and large ones, without justifying them to anyone else. "Grandma L," Michael said as we sat down to eat, "tell me again about the helicopter." He never tired of the rescue story, perhaps because it represented something powerful about speaking up when someone you love is in danger. We'd told it so many times now that it had taken on the quality of legend. The brave boy who saved his grandmother by refusing to believe the lies he was being told. "Well," I said, settling into the familiar rhythm of the tale, "you called Claire at exactly the right moment. Any later, and I might not have had the strength to answer my phone. Any earlier, and the rescue team wouldn't have been able to reach the cabin through the storm. And Mom didn't know I had Dad's old phone? She had no idea. She thought you couldn't reach anyone." He grinned with the pride of someone who'd pulled off an impossible caper. But then his expression grew more serious. "Do you think she really wanted to hurt you? Like, really hurt you?" It was a question he'd asked in various forms over the months, trying to reconcile the mother he'd loved with the woman who'd nearly killed his grandmother through calculated neglect. "I think," I said carefully, "your mother convinced herself that what she was doing was necessary. When people want something badly enough, They can find ways to justify almost anything. That doesn't make it right, but it makes it human. This was the most difficult part of healing, learning to hold space for Rachel's humanity while refusing to minimize the harm she'd caused. She wasn't a monster, which in some ways made her betrayal harder to process than if she had been. After dinner, we walked to the nearby park where an outdoor concert was beginning. The music, folk songs performed by local musicians, drifted across the grass where families had spread blankets and children ran between trees that were just beginning to leaf out. I found myself studying the other grandmother figures in the crowd. How many of them, I wondered, had stories like mine? How many had sacrificed their independence, their financial security, their sense of self for families who saw them as convenient rather than cherished? The thought no longer filled me with bitterness. Instead, I felt a kind of missionary zeal, a desire to share what I'd learned about the difference between helping family and enabling their exploitation of you. "There's something I need to tell you," I said to Michael as we found a spot on the grass. "I've been thinking about writing a book." His eyes widened. "About what happened to you. About what happened to us. About how love can be twisted into something that hurts instead of heals. About how sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to stop letting them use you." The idea had been percolating for weeks. During my long, peaceful evenings, I'd been writing, first just fragments, memories and realizations scattered across journal pages. But gradually, a larger narrative had emerged. Not just my story, but a guide for other people who might be trapped in similar situations. Would you write about me too? Only the parts you're comfortable sharing. You're the hero of this story after all. We sat in comfortable silence as the music washed over us. Around us, families laughed and children played, and I marveled at how simple this was. Sitting on grass, listening to music, spending time with someone who loved me without conditions or expectations. My phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Thinking of you tonight. Hope you're somewhere beautiful." I typed back, "In the park with Michael, listening to music under the stars. Life is beautiful." And it was. Not perfect. I still had moments of loneliness, still grieved the relationship with Rachel that might have been. But beauty didn't require perfection. It just required honesty, choice, and the courage to build something new when the old structure proved unstable. As we walked home under a canopy of spring stars, Michael slipped his hand into mine, not because he needed guidance, but because he wanted connection. The simple gesture reminded me why I'd fought so hard to survive those frozen nights in the mountain cabin, not just for my own life, but for this. These quiet moments of love that asked nothing of me except that I show up and be present. Back at the cottage, as Michael settled into his weekend room with a book and the promise of pancakes in the morning, I sat on my front porch with a cup of tea and thought about the woman I'd been 8 months ago. That Eleanor, the one who measured her worth by what she could provide to others, felt like a stranger now. She'd been so afraid of being alone that she'd accepted isolation disguised as family, so desperate to be needed that she'd confused exploitation with love. This Eleanor, the one who chose her own books and planted her own garden and made plans based on joy rather than obligation, was someone I was still getting to know. But I liked her. She was stronger than she'd given herself credit for, kinder to herself than she'd ever learned to be, and brave enough to start over at an age when most people assumed their stories were already written. Tomorrow, I'd work more on the book. Next week, I'd start the advanced pottery class. Next month, Michael and I would take that camping trip we'd been planning. Just the two of us, with proper supplies and clear weather and the absolute certainty that we both wanted to be there. The future stretched ahead of me, uncertain but mine to shape. And for the first time in decades, that felt like the greatest gift I could have asked for. As I prepared for bed in my own room, in my own house, surrounded by my own choices, I whispered a prayer of gratitude, not for rescue, but for the strength to rescue myself, for the wisdom to recognize love from manipulation, for the courage to choose joy over security, authenticity over approval, and for Michael, who'd proven that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to stay silent when someone you love is being harmed. Have you ever experienced something like Eleanor's story? Or known someone who has? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel, because stories like Eleanor's need to be heard. And messages like this need to reach people who might need them most. Sometimes the greatest act of love is learning to love yourself enough to demand better. Eleanor's journey reminds us that it's never too late to choose freedom, dignity, and joy. No matter who tries to convince you otherwise.